participating.
And just let the people in as they start coming in.
Cool. I'm gonna go dark for a bit. If you just let me know.
Okay.
I'm all good on computer audio and everything.
Yeah, you're good.
It looks good. Okay.
Oh, we lost Paul. Everybody turn your, there you go. Everybody turn your, yes, your, yeah, there you go. Oh, you can turn it, you can turn your, unmute yourselves now so we can hear you.
But what if we don't want to be seen?
Why would you not want to be seen?
Hi.
Hi, David.
Hi.
So good to see you.
Ah, hey there, Juliana.
Yeah, Lou.
Hey.
We missed you.
Missed you guys too. Missed you guys too. How is, I know the weather's not the best with the smoke over there. We're sorry about that from the west side.
Oh, yeah, don't worry about it. I know you guys have been through it too.
Well, we had a respite this morning. It was really nice. Now the smoke's coming right back in.
Going back in. Yeah. Yeah, it's been a tough couple weeks with Creek Fire and then the fires up in Healdsburg. There's literally like a 2-week, well, we haven't been out. So Mary Beth and I honestly hadn't been outside much in about a week in Fresno. And then the traveling.
Hi, everybody.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
And then the traveling up and down, I've been having conversations with different folks over there, and it was from 250 miles from Fresno to Healdsburg, and I didn't see any blue sky at all on 2 different trips over about a 10-day period. So
Terrible.
it was, yeah, it's the scale of it. I mean, when you see those satellite photos, then you get a better sense for like the scale of the smoke and everything. It's massive.
Yeah. Well, people on the East Coast are seeing smoke.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that it was rolling that way, like into Canada.
Yeah, my sister was mad at me today. Sorry.
You guys got all the wines easily, no problems? You're snacking?
No problem.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, and we'll get started. Brian, if anyone needs to join us, you just have them pop in. But remember, as yesterday, we kind of muted ourselves. And then if you wanted to ask a question, you just unmute yourself. So thank you all for joining us. It's been interesting dealing with this whole virtual world. But I want to thank David Scheidt of Mastro Scheidt, oh my gosh, Cellars. That's actually a tongue twister, I just realized. For joining us tonight and bringing his beautiful wines to us. And David, why don't you start off by telling us, how you became a wine lover and how you got started in the wine industry?
Sure. Thank you, Sharon. Thanks to the Mammoth Film Festival for having me tonight. And so it's been now since 2007 was the first vintage. And so we're going back now 13 years, 13 seasons. The start of it was I started with 3 Cabernet Sauvignons and basically made about 6 barrels worth of wine, 2 barrels from 3 different vintages or vineyards. And so it's about 50 cases in 2 barrels. So about 150 cases of wine is what I started with. And the winery has grown now under my own label, under the Mastro Scheidt label, to about 1,000 cases. And then I make wine and consult for other private labels and restaurants and individuals. And that's the other part of the business. So there's 2 parts of the business: my own label, which is Mastro Scheidt, and then all the other labels. And I think that's grown to, I believe, 6 different private labels now over that 13-year period, which is great. And so it's great to make wine for other people and their styles, and I learn from them. And then under my own label, I make about 10 different wines in total each season. There's some consistent ones like the Cuvée and the Cab, which you have in front of you. And then Rosé is relatively, that's a relatively new one. So I've only been making the Rosé the last several years.
Great.
And that's the Rosé of Sangiovese. So what you have in front of you, again, 3 wines. They represent, a good opener to what I've been doing over the last 13 years. The Rosé is something that there's a lot of great demand for in the marketplace these days. And I thought that the Sangiovese, being the half Italian, the Mastro side, and the Sangiovese connection was perfect.
Mhm.
And then with that, the next one that we'll be trying is the Cuvée. The Cuvée is meant to be sort of an everyday, easy drinking wine. It's a blended wine of different varietals. It typically revolves around Cabernet and Merlot, but we can venture into a little bit of Zinfandel, a little bit of Petit Syrah, a little bit of Sangiovese, depending upon the year and what I have in front of me, what I have from that particular vintage. And then the third wine is the Cabernet Sauvignon. That one's been in the portfolio since the beginning. It was always the Dry Creek Valley, or DCV is what we call it, the DCV cab. That's been in the portfolio since 2007, since the beginning. I've loved Dry Creek Valley. Dry Creek Valley in Sonoma County. So to give you a quick shot of where that is, you've got Russian River, Dry Creek Valley, and Alexander Valley. All pieces within Sonoma County that, if we were to look at Sonoma County is west of Napa and is actually larger than Napa Valley. Dry Creek Valley is known for 2 things. Everybody knows it for Zinfandel, but we actually grow more Cabernet Sauvignon than we do Zinfandel in Dry Creek. So so that Dry Creek cab has been a staple since the beginning. I always want it approachable. I always want it easy to drink, young, but has the ability to age. There's still some folks, especially during the early part of COVID, that were sending me pictures of the 2007 vintage that they had held on to. Some of those wines were actually in their wedding. There was one couple that brought that out and said, "Well, this sounds like the best time to do it. We're together," and we held this back from our wedding day. So that was that was one. It was a shock, and it was great to see. So it's good to see that the wines are aging well. If you like that particular style of wine, to have a little bit more age behind it. Before I ramble on too long, if there's any questions, please chime in and let me know. If you have a question about the winery or me or my background, I'm happy to go into that. I'm a self-taught winemaker, and so I've got a lot of on-the-job training, but I can give you a description of any of the vineyards, of the process that I use. I'm happy to tell you about anything that I do. I'm transparent in that respect. I don't have anything to hide. I drink my own wine. So does my family. Perhaps even a niece or nephew under the age of 21 might have sipped it at the Christmas table. So you just never know. So I'm happy to field those questions as well, if you have any.
This is Jeff and Margot. Hello.
Hey.
Do you contract for all your grapes, or do you grow as well? I didn't pick that up.
Yeah. So I contract out for all my grapes. That's also been since the beginning. With Sonoma County, in Healdsburg's a pretty small community, like Mammoth. A lot of people know each other. And there was some favorites that I was drinking early on. One of them was the Raffinellis. And so there's actually 2 brothers. There's Dave and there's Doug. Everybody knows Dave because he's the owner of A. Raffinelli Winery. But then there's his brother Doug. And Doug just grows grapes. And so Doug has grapes going all the way up the hillsides. And so in that Cabernet, you're actually drinking predominantly Raffinelli fruit from one of his vineyards, but it's Doug's vineyard. And so in a year like this one, where we've got a lot of fire issues, and I can speak briefly about that, it's actually nice to have the option to contract out with different individuals around the state and different growers. So I buy fruit in Mendocino County, Lake County, Sonoma County, and Fresno County, actually. And within Fresno County, there's a couple growers that I know. While there's been a lot of smoke in the general area, there's been there's not going to be any fires in the town of Fresno or Mendota or Madera unless it's a house fire. So as that smoke travels from the creek fire throughout the state, the sun is actually deactivating a lot of that creosote. And that creosote is what we're most concerned with as grape grower or as winemakers and grape growers, that creosote falls on the grapes themselves, penetrates the skins, and then during fermentation reveals itself. So we can actually do testing on the grapes prior to fermentation, but and we can get a reading. So a lot of people did some readings earlier this year on their grapes to see if they had smoke taint, and we can get that in parts per billion. Well, that was actually registering already in some places at 2 parts per billion on the skins, right? Well, once you ferment that, you got to get a second reading, but we can actually check that out if we do a small little fermentation in a bucket. So that's what we've been doing actually for the last several weeks is fermenting grapes off the vine in small 5-gallon buckets and seeing just on a sensory basis if we can smell or taste any smoke. And it's really easy to figure out. It smells like a campfire and it tastes like an ashtray. And so I don't need a scientific test in the lab to tell me that I've got it. It's prevalent. And if you don't have it, you go, oh, look, it smells like grape juice and yeast. Big deal. If it does, it's almost instantly recognizable to most people. I can't say that that's everybody, because everybody has a different threshold. It's also nice to work in a facility with other winemakers. So I work with, there's probably about another 5 other winemakers at the winery we all work at together, and we all taste each other's stuff. So we all get that second and third and fourth opinion, which is helpful. And in that, each of us have a different perception of what we're tasting, but it's generally been unanimous on when we find a bucket that we've pre-fermented that has smoke taint. And so yes, I contract grapes from a wide variety of places. I've generally been consistent with Sonoma County over the years. That's probably 80% of what I pick up every year, and then the rest is coming from Mendocino, Lake, and the Central Valley. It depends on the program that I'm working with, and I can go into those specifics as well.
Do you want to get started with your first wine?
So first wine, Rosé of Sangiovese, 100% Sangiovese. There are 2 ways to make a rosé. The first way is what's called the Saignée method or the bleed-off method, which is where we take red wine grapes, we give them a light little crush, we let them hang out overnight, and then we drain the bottom of the tank. Guess what? We get nice pink juice. We don't get super red juice, we get pink juice, okay? That's one way to do it. The second way to do it is the European sort of style that's been around for a long time. And that's basically the same way as you would make a white wine. You take those same red grapes, you bring them in, you do not destem them, and you leave them all nice big clusters. You put them directly in the press and squeeze. And so you're getting minimal skin contact as opposed to having it sit in a tank overnight. And you're not having to pre-crush them. So you just squeeze out the juice. And so you do that. It takes maybe a couple hours to get that done in the process. And what you get is a little bit more of a pale pink, right? Or maybe even a salmon color, especially when it comes to Sangiovese. You don't get a real bright red type of color. And so that's just a direct to press method. I use the direct to press method for the Rosé of Sangiovese. Why? I like the crispness of the wine. I like the color. Gives me a little bit of a better indication that it was a straight to press method, because it's a bit more salmony and not bright red Sangiovese. And I just like working with it a little bit better. I think when I'm able to pull those grapes off a little bit earlier, which is what I would do for rosé, because I want a higher acid content and I want lower sugar. I get a lower alcohol, I get a better acid, I get a better mouthfeel. So what we do is we start that out, like I said, pressing it off. We start it off in stainless steel to get fermentation going and keep all the control on temperature. And that also allows some of the heavier solids to settle in the tank, so that when after about 5 days, we then what's called racking off, or basically you get rid of all those heavy solids, which kind of settle at the bottom of the stainless steel tank. You get rid of that, and then you immediately put it in barrel. And so the rest of the fermentation process actually happens in oak. But these are several times used oak barrels. So I don't want to impart any oak flavors or oak tannins to a rosé. But I do want to allow for a smaller fermentation vessel. I want to allow for a little bit better oxidation on the wine, because in a stainless steel tank, I can actually add CO2 to the tank. I can add nitrogen to the tank. I can add argon to the tank. I can do things to make sure that it doesn't oxidize if I don't want it to. In the case of carbon dioxide, that is oxidative, but in a direct part of fermentation. But in a barrel, there's still a lot of things we don't necessarily know what's going on in that barrel, right? The idea that there are probably, for lack of a better word, little critters in there, microbes and little things that we're just not quite 100% sure that don't ever die. We can steam clean it. We can hit it with ozone and hot water and all sorts of, peracetic acid and everything else. But the truth of the matter is that there's some mystery, right? There's some chemistry we just don't quite understand that happens in that fermentation. And so do we want that to be utterly and completely random and contaminate the wine? Absolutely not. No. So we obviously try to make the barrels as clean as possible. We don't want to make sure that we're introducing a harmful microbe or yeast in there like Brettanomyces. But we also, kind of live in the world of, well, there might be some risk, but we're trying to mitigate that risk to the greatest degree we can. So in this case, it allows perhaps some additional character that you wouldn't get completely out of stainless steel, but nothing off. Everything's flavorful. It should be bright red fruits like strawberries. It depends, but generally red fruits, strawberries, raspberries, that type of a class of fruit for that particular wine. Easy to drink, should go with a wide variety of things. Slight chill should bring you all the way through summer, and now it seems like it's rosé all day and rosé all year. So we believe now rosé is becoming that 12-month wine like Chardonnay is, and sort of as a wine for all seasons at this point. So
what kind of
access? What's that?
What kind of foods does it go well with? Does it pair well with?
Yeah, so you know what? During the summer, during the hottest months, I'm happy to have it with barbecue chicken during the summers. I think that it's easy to start off that wine more classically with some form of charcuterie and cheese, something easy going to start with, sort of pre-dinner for a lot of people. So if you're breaking out, beers, White Claws, Rosé, and Chardonnay, that sort of bandwidth of beverages prior to dinner. What might you be snacking on? Does it go well with like spicy foods? Yeah, I think it does. It depends though. I think some of the sweeter styled rosés will probably go better with spicy, whereas some of the saltier and savory items will go better with a drier rosé, which is what I have. There can still be a fruit component to dry rosé, which makes you think that it's sweet. And so sometimes you can delve into the spicier items, something like, I don't know, what might be popular, those jalapeno poppers, something like that, which I know we've had. That'll work with cold rosé because I'm pretty sure we've had it. Bacon, that works. Because again, you're not getting any oak elements. So what are you getting with bacon? You're getting something smoked. You're getting something salty and savory. So that works. And like I said, it's really, for us, it's probably the go-to with, cheese, bruschettas, stuff like that. Something that's easy, something that works. And it'll hold up to vinegar. So if you're doing something with balsamics, things like that, it'll work too.
Does anyone else have any questions about the wine that you're drinking? There's we've got a group of people toasting us.
Ah, very good.
So 100% Sangiovese, right? Nothing else?
Yes, 100%. 100%.
Hi, Stacy.
It's quite lovely, David.
Thank you, Juliana. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, I think that was Stacy that said that.
No, it was Juliana.
Oh, is
Hi,
Stacy?
Sharon.
Hi.
We're having a great time with this festival. You've done an awesome job pulling it together, and this has been so fun to just enjoy in the comfort of my own PJs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me
Um,
mute.
And the nice thing about wine tasting in your own home is you don't have to worry about driving later, so we can drink as much as we want, right?
That is also cool. Please drink responsibly, Juliana.
I'll try.
Okay. So why don't we carry on to the next wine?
Sure, the cuvee. So the cuvee, initially I used to label that wine with the specific percentages of Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cab Franc, whatever it is that I was putting in there. However, every time I did that, I had to re-seek approval from the Tax and Trade Bureau, also known as the Treasury Department of the federal government. That could take sometimes 3 months. So I decided to just call it cuvee, which is just a term for basically blended wine, and call it red wine. So I'm here to offer the disclosure on exactly what's in it, which is easy because I know what it is. I made it. So what I do with the cuvee each year is what I'm looking for is something to drink and release readily within, I would say, 9 months after that particular vintage year. The restaurant world loves that wine, loves that cuvee. It's at Mammoth Tavern, for instance. It's at Petra's. It's around town. Mitch at A-Frame has been carrying it for a while as well. And they like it because it's easy to drink. It's one of those wines where it's not cloyingly sweet. It's not going to punch you in the face with tannin. It's not going to be a big scoop of blackberry jam in your mouth. It's meant to, again, go with a wide variety of foods. Could you have a steak with this wine? Absolutely, right? The steak might shine a little bit more. Could you technically have this with a barbecued swordfish? Absolutely, you could. If you're just feeling like red wine, right? And my dad would be accused of probably having red wine more with fish than I would, my sensibilities would like. But he's my dad, so he can drink whatever he wants with whatever he wants. So that cuvee, in its current iteration, is a Merlot and Sangiovese based wine. There are small percentages, and I'm talking under 5% of Cabernet Sauvignon, Petit Syrah, and Zinfandel, but it is Merlot and Sangiovese dominant in this round. What are Merlot and Sangiovese generally known for? Red fruits, right, and low tannins, okay? Which again, kind of fall into the argument of that's why it should be easy to drink. It should be red fruit based. So again, now we're getting into perhaps cherry, black cherry style fruits with that particular wine. Again, a softer, lighter tannin structure, easy to drink. Pop it open without any decanting, and pretty much rock and roll. I would say. Fruits coming from Sonoma County, although California is on the label. Sonoma County is where the fruit's coming from in this particular iteration, and will continue to come from California or Sonoma County. The reason the California label's on there is it gives me a little bit of cover in case I fall more than 15% or 15 to 25% of a particular varietal that was outside of the Sonoma County region. So if I was picking up some fruit from the foothills or from Mendocino or from Lake County, then I would have to change the Sonoma County label again back to California or back to something else. And so that has to go back through the approval process, which could take way too long, and we don't want to mess with that. So in this particular case, the Sangiovese and the Merlot are coming from Sonoma County in 2017. In 18, it's going to change. It's going to be actually in 18, that wine's going to be Zinfandel and Merlot. and that's going to be technically it's going to be 100% Sonoma County. It's going to technically be 100% from, well, it's 50-50. It's Alexander Valley and Dry Creek. So as the 18 starts to get released, which will be probably later this year, 17 is coming to an end. The 18 will get released probably in a couple months. So look forward to seeing that. And we just had it, Mary Beth and I just had it a couple nights ago, just to, make sure. Because we've been drinking the 17 through the summer. As I think when it's 110 degrees out, it's I like lighter style reds, the rosés. I don't go for big cabs when it's 100 degrees out. I'm waiting for it to cool down before we start cracking open the big wines. But any questions about the cuvee?
Are the Sangiovese grapes did they come from the same place as the rosé? I know it's a different year, but
yeah,
same place.
Yeah. So in 2017, those would have come from that would have been Russian River Valley, Sangiovese. That's where I would have made the Sangiovese for that same year in 17, the rosé as well. For the rosé of Sangiovese that you have in front of you, that actually came from Cardella Vineyards in Mendota.
What?
The rosé, Central Valley. Yeah, thank you. I just picked up Chenin Blanc from him yesterday. So, yeah. So I'll be doing a Chenin Blanc from Cardella Vineyards out of Mendota. We just had a long day yesterday, but yeah, he's a great grower. He's a Fresno State grad. He's been a friend of mine for since we were kids. He was a baseball player, and I remember he's a lot taller than I am. I'm about 5'6". He's over 6 feet tall. He's a catcher, and I was an umpire back in high school, and so we all went to the same high schools together. We went to the same grammar schools together, but. So we've kept in touch, and he's a good grower. He's a good winemaker. He's got a great team, and so I'm happy to buy fruit from him.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
So did you say that white wines are actually made from red grapes?
Okay, so juice. Okay, so maybe a couple things. So the answer would be. No, but they can be. So the idea that the juice is clear from red wine grapes, except for maybe a few. So Alicante Bouschet is one of the few red wine grapes that actually has red juice. But Cabernet Sauvignon actually has clear juice. So if we didn't do anything to sort of add skin pigmentation to Cabernet juice, I guess it's theoretically possible to make a white wine from Cabernet Sauvignon, but it's going to be really, really hard. It would probably still come out pink. So like white Zinfandel, that is from Zinfandel grapes. It could be diluted. We could bleach the color out if we wanted to with sulfur. We can probably do some things chemically to get rid of the color itself. But if it's a red wine, it's generally going to make either a rosé or a true red wine. If it's a white wine grape, it's going to make white wine, unless, I'll add more complexity, we leave it on the skins and then we call it an orange wine. But that's just a white wine with skin contact. And if you add more skin contact to it, you can effectively make what would be like an orangish colored wine. So I think that covers everything. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Back to the rosé.
Yeah.
I love rosé, but the sugar is so high in it for me as a rule that I can't drink it at night because it's just too hard on me. But yours seems so dry. Can I drink it at night? Please tell me I can.
So from a chemical standpoint, what I'll look for dryness is a glucose fructose test. And so I do that at the end of all the fermentations. And with my rosé, it shows up with no reading. It doesn't mean that there isn't a trace amount, like less than 1 gram per liter of glucose and fructose, but I'm not sure which one, because it's a combined test. but that rosé shows up as less than 1 gram per liter of glucose and fructose after we test it chemically.
Do you know what a sweet rosé would come up with on that test?
Oh, it can come up to 6 grams per liter.
Okay.
Yeah, of residual sugar. Yeah, it depends on the brand. It depends on the labeling. But if we're making a dry rosé, we generally want to be under at least 3 grams per liter, if not 1. I prefer less. I prefer under 1. And depending upon who's making it, you could technically add sugar back. So a lot of winemakers will take a rosé, they'll finish it out dry chemically, so under 1 gram per liter, and then they will add residual sugar back or concentrate back to adjust the acid, to adjust the flavor profile, the sweetness profile. Because again, as Americans, generally speaking, we like Coke and Pepsi, that sort of thing. And so there's a lot of winemakers that will add sugar back to a perfectly good dry rosé. I don't do that. So less than 1 gram per liter.
Thank you very much.
You
I
bet.
will be fine.
Thank you. And that goes for red wines too. So not just rosé, not just white, but also red. Again, I'm looking chemically to have it what would be basically dry, which is less than 1 gram per liter of glucose fructose per liter. But there are a lot of winemakers that are very happily will go up to 9 grams per liter of residual sugar in red wines. And there's plenty of them on the market. I don't gravitate that direction.
I don't know if you mentioned this, but how many cases of the rosé and of the cuvée that we've drank tonight? How many did you make?
Yeah. So the rosé, depending upon the year, it's right around 100 cases of rosé. The cuvée is typically around 150 to 200 cases of cuvée per year. Again, depending upon the season, depending upon demand. 2020 has thrown us all a curveball, so production will be down this year because of anything from fires to restaurants not being in business. But in a typical year, about 100 cases of rosé, about 150 to 200 cases of cuvée. Yeah, cuvée is one of the higher production wines, simply because it was favored by restaurants, and so they'd like them on their by the glass menus, and that's what they like. They like the easy drinking. At one point, I was using a screw cap for that wine in the restaurants. They loved it because it was easy to deal with. I went back to cork finish on all the wines in 2017 across the board, except for the rosé and the white. I do make a white wine, but it's already sold out. Shira asked, don't worry. I said I was sold out. I couldn't offer any next season. It'll be Chenin Blanc.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
The name cuvée, it's red wine. You could just call it 2017 red wine.
Correct.
Does cuvée actually add to it, except that it sounds French and fancy? And by the way, hi, Muffin Pete.
I would say you're exactly correct. It sounds French and fancy, and it is. And so a lot of people just like to know from a marketing or name standpoint, like, what's the name of this wine? Oh, it's the cuvée. Cabernet Sauvignon, and a lot of people like blends. So yes, the legal definition is it's simply a red wine from California. But from a branding standpoint, a lot of people will just ask for, oh, do you have a cuvée? Because that's sort of in the marketplace. A lot of folks know what the cuvée is. Or do you have a red wine blend? The answer is yes. And so I've got a yes and a yes on that answer.
Okay, why don't we go to the third wine, the last wine?
Yeah. So the third wine is the Cabernet Sauvignon, the DCV Cab, the one that's been in the portfolio the longest, since 2007. And I've always wanted to make, and always have made, a wine that, again, represents Dry Creek Valley. So we talk about terroir. We talk about, there's a wine term called typicity, right? So the idea of Cabernet Sauvignon, whitest planted grape, heaviest by tonnage in Dry Creek Valley. It should taste like the place, right? So Dry Creek Valley is pretty small overall. It's pretty narrow. It's only about 2 miles wide, only about 7 miles long. And it has alluvial soils at the base, and it can have granitic soils, serpentine soils on either side of the valley. And it's generally warm. It can, this year it got up to 116 degrees. In 2017, it got up to 116 degrees for about 3 days. And so it can also be a very hot place. But generally speaking, at night, it comes in to cool down, and it could come from 116 midday and cool down to 58 degrees at night. That's a huge shift, and that's called that diurnal shift. And so that's what generally makes premium red wine grapes, is that diurnal shift, okay? That shift from real warm during the daytime to really cool at night. Well, just like humans, we want to rest. And so if it's 96 degrees at midnight, those red wines don't necessarily get to rest. They don't get to shut off a little bit. But in Dry Creek Valley, they get to. And then we get these nice warm temperatures during the day to stay consistent. And so ripens up the fruit beautifully. With that particular wine, now we're moving away from the red fruits that we've been talking about and into the black and the blue fruits, right? Blackberry tends to resonate, especially with my wines, especially based upon the vineyards that I'm getting them from. There tends to be wild blackberries growing everywhere in the vineyards that I tend to select, sometimes right in the middle of the rows because they're very difficult to eradicate. We don't spray these vineyards with Roundup. That's not going to happen. So the only effective way to get rid of blackberry bushes is pull them out or dig them out. Well, they're also really resilient, and they got a lot of thorns. And so they tend to stay in certain places in the vineyard, whether you want them there or not. And that terroir, that typicity from Dry Creek Valley tends to resonate, especially with Zinfandels and Cabernets, that blackberry type of resonance for sure. The next thing is, because it's Dry Creek, right? It has sort of oftentimes a spice note to it, sometimes a bramble to the wines that comes out in sort of a spice component to those wines. Not necessarily baking spice per se. Those can be resonant in some wines, but with the Cabernet, with the Dry Creek Valley wines, I would say that there's a nice complexity of black fruit and warm spice. Sometimes people get a note of clove. Sometimes people get a note of perhaps nutmeg. But generally speaking, what I'm looking for in that Dry Creek Valley Cab is now we're lending itself to heartier dishes, not necessarily tomato sauce per se, but perhaps a steak with a beautiful Parmesan and buttered noodle, something that's going to carry a little bit of fat, something that's going to allow that Dry Creek Valley Cab with its tannin, with its weight, to sort of cut through all that and just really just blend beautifully in the mouth with heartier dishes. Is that really going to go with that barbecue chicken we talked about earlier, where rosé I think can work with it? I don't think so. I think we're going to lend itself more to those heartier, richer, deeper dishes. As we get into winter, I'd say just about any stew is going to work with it. I'd even fancy a chili with that. Depends on the spice profile. With it, I probably wouldn't go too spicy, but something that's hearty and rich, maybe even spiked with a little bit of bourbon, might work. New oak on the wine. With this one, about 33% new oak. I tend to favor American oak, and I'm not going to use the term American oak as generic or homogenized. American oak from northern forests, specifically Minnesota. And those northern forests are colder. We grow American oak for the wine business anywhere from Missouri to Virginia, Pennsylvania, all in that sort of eastern area, and into the south. Why? It's bourbon country, bourbon American oak, get it? But within Minnesota, we've got colder forests, we've got tighter grains, we've got things that resemble a bit more like French oak, albeit it's not French oak. We also have with the cooperages that I buy from, I'm looking for those trees and that oak to be seasoned. In other words, they're cut, they're planed, and they're dried over a period of 2 to 4 years. I'm looking for the planks that are being dried over 4 years, not 2. So when we talk about American oak can often have, when it's of lower quality and not dried as long, can have a dill characteristic to it, that green characteristic, or perhaps even coconut characteristic to it. I'm looking to get rid of those, which is why I buy oak that's at least 3 years seasoned, but often 4 years seasoned. And so it pushes that profile to more of those richer mocha, chocolate, espresso, roasted flavors, which I enjoy personally. I'm a huge espresso fan. I'm a huge chocolate fan. And so I'd prefer to have those flavors in my red wines, not dill.
I have a question.
Yes.
When you said with the temperatures you were talking about, do
Yes.
you harvest at night at all?
No. So we try to get started early in the morning, 6 a.m. first light, depending upon the vineyard and how many people I can get together at the time. If I can have a crew of 15 people on a small vineyard, we can get that thing picked in 2 or 3 hours.
Okay. When did you start picking your reds this year?
Let's see. I've rejected more fruit than I've taken this year.
Because
yeah.
I was in Napa around the 12th or 13th of August, and it was before the fires.
Yes.
And they had just started the Sauvignon Blanc, which
Yeah.
they always do early anyway. So I was just curious when the rest of the harvest started coming in.
Yeah, so the fires in Dry Creek started around August, I believe 19th. I think I have that correct. And we also had a heat wave during that same week, which was about 110 degrees or higher in some areas. With white wines, they tend to get picked at night, either by hand or by machine. It depends on the vineyard and if it's laid out properly. That helps bring those white wines in cool, right? Because we often ferment white wines at 55, 65 degrees, much cooler over a longer period of time. With red wines, we can ferment generally in the 80-degree range, which is totally fine. We don't want necessarily a 90-degree fermentation, which is pretty hot, and we don't want our fruit coming in at ambient 110-degree temperature. It'd be better to just leave it on the vine, come back the next day, and pick it in the next round. So
Now, your wines are bottled in Cloverdale.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's just north of Healdsburg.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Just north of Healdsburg.
I know where Cloverdale is. I have some friends that live in Hopland, so I know the area.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah, see, I say Healdsburg to a lot of folks because they know Healdsburg as being sort of the center of the wine universe up in that area. But Cloverdale, there's a lot of wines made at Cloverdale.
Cloverdale, Alexander Valley, it's all there.
Exactly. So you would get off at Canyon Road and 101 and then get on to Chianti Road, which is where I make all the wines.
My friends in Hopland, their vineyard backs up to the Russian River. They get flooded out every once in a while. Yeah, every once in a while. It's this year. It's not so much, but no, a great question, because we're sometimes in a real race to get the fruit off the vine prior to it being dehydrated too much, and so Zinfandel often can be dehydrating more quickly. Cabernet has a thicker skin, so it's a bit more resilient to the heat and to the sun. The canopy might be a little bit different as well. Pinot Noir is real subject to it, scorching and dehydration and heat. But are you having a hard time finding workers for harvesting?
Every year.
Yes,
Yeah, every year. Yeah, every year. So if you were looking for a side gig, we could probably pay about $45 an hour to pick. That's the going rate right now on hand picking grapes. About anywhere between $35 and $45 an hour.
When should we schedule that?
All bloodied. I didn't go to hospital.
Yeah.
When should we schedule that, David? We can put it in our vacation folder.
Yeah. Well, this year it might be a tough gig, Juliana, because with the fires, and so it kind of leads into the back question, which was, I've rejected more fruit this year than I've harvested. I don't know if that is necessarily industry wide, but the idea that in a normal year by this time, I probably would have been 80% pulled off the vine of both white, rosé, and red wines, with maybe a little bit of Cabernet left or Merlot left at the near the end of September, and I'm generally done. So this year, because of all the fire issues, and we had those 2 heat spikes, we've had 2 of them, not just one, the one in August and then another one in September. What that's done is first of all, forced us to test for smoke taint early on. Then once the heat spikes, the second heat spike came, then we had to decide whether it was even worth picking because it was too dehydrated. So that puts us into a framework of, gosh, should we try to hustle this up and get it off the vine if it hasn't been sufficiently smoke tested? But then are we doing ourselves harm now by waiting even longer for massive dehydration? So these are tough calls kind of on the spot. If you're a much bigger winery, or if you're a very large corporate entity, global corporate entity, you can wait a little bit longer because you're diluting millions of gallons of wine from all over the state, and you'll take practically any grape if it's cheap enough. I don't do that, and I'm not going to do that. So in my case, I'm just trying to make smart decisions at this point on very specific vineyards. So we picked a Zinfandel, which is dry farmed. It's been been in the portfolio for longer than 10 years. There's a cab vineyard there as well. And the dry farm vineyard in Dry Creek Valley at this particular site off of Lytton Springs Road has been extremely resilient to heat. Yep, I'm right down the road. So the Ridge Lytton Springs, Ridge is a favorite of mine. I'm basically right on the other side of the municipal airport, or the General Aviation Airport right there. That's where another one of my vineyards sits, and it is dry farmed, and it can hold up to the heat. In fact, it held up pretty well through both of them, and it doesn't get any water other than Mother Nature. It also has a massive breeze through there. And so I know that both Ridge and my vineyards were picked in the last week for Zinfandel. And we didn't get any smoke taint in that area. Now, only that area. After that particular little swath of land there at Lytton Springs, which gets a breeze and it gets a cross flow, there was actually, even though the fire was only about 5 miles away, the smoke wasn't going in that particular area at the beginning of the fire. It was going south towards Russian River Valley. And could that have affected the way the smoke affected our grapes versus somebody else's? I would have to say yes, but we don't have a scientific sort of study to point to that, other than to say there was no smoke in the air. We had blue skies for several days before the wind shifted towards us. And I did microferments. I know Ridge has done microferments. I know the farmer that works on both of those vineyards. We're not coming up with any smoke taint in that particular area. Don't ask me why. It was 5 miles away from a huge fire. So
hold up to your standards. You may not do millions of gallons of wine, but hold up your standards, because we like to buy good wines.
Yeah, thank you.
Those million gallons we don't need.
Yeah. So
you know what? And you may have a tough year, but growing grapes, you're a farmer.
Yeah.
Let's be a farmer, and farmers are subject to all those things.
We are subject to Mother Nature risk, things we can't control. Correct. And so
here's to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
In a tough time.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Very tough time.
Yeah, we'll be harvested. There's only one other red wine that I have scheduled to be harvested, which is going to be next Thursday, or this coming Thursday. It's an Alexander Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. I've pre-tested it. It's testing out fine. It tastes good. It smells good. There's another winemaker that's taking the same vineyard with me. We're both, in alignment on it. We both like it. We make our own wines. We do our own work. We're both saying, yeah, it's good to go. So we're going to pull that off
on Tuesday or on Thursday of this coming week, and then we'll see from there where we go. There might only be one other vineyard that I'll harvest out of Moon Mountain, and that probably won't be ready for a couple more weeks. So we won't do any testing for at least another week before we're certain on that one. We got a little bit more time, and that's about it.
David,
No, Alan's been waiting. She keeps trying to get in, and everybody keeps talking. Stop, Juliana. Alan, go.
Wow.
Oh, she forgot the question. No, I know the question. I just wanted to ask it since the beginning. Your wines are fantastic. What is the process of using grapes from outside of California?
Oh, you know what? You've stumped the band. I don't know. I don't know. So, I mean, there's grapes grown in all 50 states these days. I think there's wine grown in all 50 states, but I don't know what the legal or agricultural process is from like hauling grapes from, let's say, Oregon, like Oregon Pinot, to California to process. I don't know, to be honest.
Okay, that's interesting because we just moved from Washington and they've got so many great grapes up there, but you are so clever with how you do your fermentation. I would just be so interested to see how you would work with something from Washington or Oregon.
Yeah, and it'd be great because I like working with new varietals like I made an Alicante Boucher. That was that one I maybe referenced a little bit earlier that has both red skins and red juice. And it was an own rooted, in other words, it doesn't have a rootstock on it. It was just own rooted in sand, oddly enough. And it made a brilliant wine. I sold it off to another winery that's headed by a sommelier out of San Francisco. They loved it, right? I kept a little bit for myself, but it was one of those projects which is a lot of fun. Pinot Noir I've only worked with a couple times out of Russian River. Obviously, it's a great grape to work with, and would love another opportunity. And I do. I love Oregon Pinot. There's some Syrahs out of Washington which are really cool. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff out there. I don't know what the process is, to be honest with you. I might have a little weekend project there, taking a look around on the internet.
Thank you. Sorry, Juliana. Sorry.
You said you talked about picking grapes, but I want to know, I saw this I Love Lucy episode, and if we pick the grapes, could we come and crush the grapes too?
Yeah.
By foot.
Yes. Okay. So foot treading. So the answer is yes. The short answer is yes. The second answer is that Lucy thing is actually a real thing. Okay. So that's not just for stagecraft, right? That is foot treading is something that I've actually had to do on one of my real small berry, that dry farm Cabernet, because the berries are so tiny. They're like blueberries, right? The only way for me to even get a decent crush, they wouldn't crush in the crusher destemmer thing, right? There's these rollers. They were slipping in between the rollers. So in other words, the only way to get these grapes crushed was for me to get in there, hairy legs and all, and foot stomp them, because I couldn't get the grapes to burst. And I needed to get some juice in there for the fermentation to even get started. And so it is a legit thing to foot stomp. We'd be happy to have you, and throw the grandkids in there. They'd have a great time.
Shira and I are going to be Lucy and Ethel. Just tell us when to show up.
No, we have
next year, Shira, we're going to have him bring his grapes, because we will not be in COVID, hopefully. You can't virtually stomp, but do that someday, Mastro.
We have done it.
It's
two different
so
occasions
fun.
where we've gotten in and stomped grapes.
It is a lot of fun. Some people, like I've seen, guys totally shave legs, sanitize legs, like, this full blown peroxide bath to get in there to do their thing.
I just took my socks off.
Yeah, that's kind of what I did. I was in my shorts that day.
So David, before we close up, why don't you tell everybody where they can find your wine for future purchases?
Sure. So in Mammoth, it's easy. All sorts of places, but in Mammoth, it's A-frame, side door. Both sell my wines retail. But during pandemic, I think you can get them almost at any restaurant these days as well. So the Brasserie, Chef Red, he's got them, and they got them at Petra's. Skatey's had them on and off. Mammoth Tavern has them. Let's see. Am I forgetting anybody in town? I don't want to forget anybody in town.
What about the people from out of town?
Yeah, okay. So then from the people out of town, depends on where you are. But like did I send somebody to Hermosa Beach? I might have. If it's at Uncorked in Hermosa Beach, as a matter of fact. Or you can check the website online or email me. So the prices online, since I know who you guys are, happy to give you a discount on the prices online. But you can feel free to email me, go onto the website, fill out the contact form. Email's david@mastroscheidt.com. That's david@mastroscheidt.com. I'm supposed to say it 3 times on the radio, right? For people to remember, david@mastroscheidt.com. And or take a look on the back of any of the bottles that you have. It should say www.mastroscheidt.com. Just go to the website, email me, call me. I'm the only one that picks up the phone. And if you look for any of the wines, I'm happy to ship them to you in California. Real easy for me to do. Hopefully the process was pretty seamless through UPS, which is what we did this week. But yeah, if you want them, give me a ring.
Well, I want to thank you so much for participating in our festival. It's added a really great element to this crazy life that we're living right now. And I can't thank you enough. And thank you to all the participants that have been hanging with us and that took advantage of the wine tasting element of the film festival ticket.
Thank you so much, Shira. Thanks, Mammoth Lake Film Festival. Thanks to everybody that participated.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you. Good night.